I never imagined that coming home from my shift at the hospital would lead to discovering half my front lawn had been paved over with concrete. But there I was, staring at fresh asphalt that definitely wasn't there when I left that morning. My name is Oliver Anderson, and I'm an emergency room nurse at Valley Presbyterian Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. I work the night shift most weeks, which means I leave my house around 6 in the evening and don't return until 8 the next morning. That particular Thursday in March started like any other day. I pulled into my driveway, exhausted from dealing with 3 car accident victims and a guy who thought he could deep fry a turkey indoors, only to find that my neighbor's driveway had mysteriously expanded by about 15 feet directly onto my property. The house next to mine had been sold 6 months earlier to a woman named Brenda Cunningham, who immediately made it known that she was the newly elected president of our homeowners association. Brenda was everything you'd expect from someone who volunteers to run an HOA in a suburban Phoenix neighborhood. She was 52 years old with that specific haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." Always wore athleisure clothing despite never actually exercising, and had an opinion about everything everyone did in our quiet little community of Saguaro Heights. I stood there in my scrubs, holding my lunch bag and staring at what used to be my grass. The new concrete was still slightly wet, and I could see tire tracks leading from Brenda's garage across the fresh surface. She'd apparently already started using it. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my other neighbor, Tom, came jogging over from across the street. Tom was a retired postal worker who spent most of his days watching the neighborhood from his front porch. "You seeing this?" Tom asked, slightly out of breath. "I watched the whole thing happen. Crew showed up at 7 this morning with a cement truck and just started pouring. I thought maybe you'd hired them, but then I saw Brenda out there directing everything." "She poured concrete on my lawn," I said, my brain still trying to catch up. "Not just concrete, that's asphalt. Same stuff they use for roads. She had a whole crew out here, 3 guys, a truck, the works. I asked her about it, and she told me to mind my own business." I walked closer to inspect the damage. Sure enough, Brenda had extended her driveway by a significant margin, and it clearly crossed over the property line onto my land. My front lawn wasn't huge to begin with, maybe 40 feet across, and she'd taken a good chunk of the southern portion where I usually kept some desert landscaping with a few cacti and decorative rocks. "Did she say anything to you about this?" Tom asked. "Not a word." "I haven't spoken to her in weeks, not since she sent me that ridiculous letter about my mailbox being half an inch too tall according to HOA standards." Tom shook his head. "Man, she's been on a tear lately. She sent Carol a fine last week because her rose bush was growing through the fence. Said it was creating an eyesore for the neighborhood. Carol's had that rose bush for 12 years. I felt my anger building, but I was too tired to deal with this immediately. I'd been awake for over 24 hours, and I needed sleep before I could handle whatever confrontation was about to happen. "I'm going to get some rest," I told Tom. "Then I'm going to deal with this. You want me to take some pictures for you? For evidence." "That'd be great, actually." "Thanks, Tom." I went inside my house, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about the audacity of what Brenda had done, who just paves over someone else's property without asking, without even mentioning it. I tossed and turned for a few hours before finally giving up around noon. After a shower and some food, I walked next door and knocked on Brenda's front door. It took 3 rounds of knocking before she finally answered, looking annoyed that I'd interrupted her day. "Can I help you, Oliver?" she asked, not opening the screen door. "Yeah, Brenda, you can help me. You can explain why half my front lawn is now part of your driveway." She pursed her lips. I don't know what you're talking about. The concrete, the asphalt, whatever you poured this morning, it's on my property. Actually, she said, opening the screen door and stepping out onto her porch, if you'd attended the last HOA meeting, you'd know that we had a surveyor come out and remap the property lines for this entire street. Turns out your property line isn't where you think it is. That land belongs to me. I felt my face getting hot. That's impossible. I have a survey from when I bought this house 3 years ago. Well, your survey was wrong. The HOA hired a professional to do it correctly, and the results are final. That's my land, and I needed the extra driveway space for my new Escalade. Then show me the survey. I don't have to show you anything. Take it up with the HOA board if you have a problem. She started to go back inside. You are the HOA board, Brenda. You're the president and your husband is the treasurer. That's 2 out of 3 board members. She turned back to me with a tight smile. Exactly. Which means the decision has already been made. Have a nice day, Oliver. She shut the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I should knock again or just kick the door down. The rational part of my brain, the part that dealt with emergencies calmly and professionally, told me to walk away and handle this the right way. The exhausted, angry part of me wanted to rent a jackhammer and tear up her new driveway extension myself. I chose the rational approach. Back in my house, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the property survey from 2023. It clearly showed my property line, and according to this document, Brenda's new driveway was definitely on my land. I took photos of the survey, photos of the driveway, and started documenting everything. Then I called a lawyer. The first 3 attorneys I contacted didn't specialize in property disputes. The 4th one, a guy named Richard Mills who had an office in downtown Phoenix, told me he could see me the next day. I took a personal day from work and drove downtown on Friday afternoon. Richard's office was on the 7th floor of a building near the courthouse. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with a sharp suit and an even sharper handshake. So, he said after I'd explained the situation, your HOA president extended her driveway onto your property without permission. That's right. And she claims the HOA did a new survey that shows the land is actually hers. She said that, yes, but she won't show me any documentation. Richard leaned back in his chair. Here's the thing about property lines. They're public record. If there was a new survey done, it would have to be filed with the county. Let me make a call. He spent about 10 minutes on the phone with someone at the Maricopa County Recorder's office while I sat there drinking bad coffee from his waiting room. When he hung up, he was grinning. There's no new survey on file. The only survey recorded for your property is the one you have from 2023. Your neighbor is lying. So what do? We send her a letter demanding she remove the driveway extension immediately. If she refuses, we file a lawsuit for trespass and property damage. It's pretty straightforward, actually. The law is very clear about property rights. How long will this take? Depends on how reasonable she is. If she agrees to remove it after getting our letter, could be done in a couple weeks. If she fights it, we're looking at several months. I thought about Brenda's attitude, about the way she'd shut the door in my face. She's going to fight it. Then we'll fight back, and we'll win. I'm very confident about that. I hired Richard on the spot. He drafted a cease and desist letter that afternoon, and I had it hand-delivered to Brenda's house on Saturday morning. Tom texted me around 9 to let me know that Brenda had basically thrown the letter in the delivery guy's face and slammed the door. The next week was relatively quiet. I worked my shifts at the hospital, came home, and stared at the chunk of my lawn that was now asphalt. Richard filed the lawsuit on Thursday, and Brenda was served with papers on Friday afternoon. That's when things escalated. I came home from work Saturday morning to find a letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, signed by Brenda, informing me that my mailbox was in violation of community standards and needed to be replaced within 14 days or I'd face daily fines of $50. My mailbox was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. The same mailbox that had been fine for 3 years. I called Richard. "She's retaliating," he said. "This is actually good for us. It shows a pattern of harassment. Keep that letter. If she sends more, keep those too." More letters came. Over the next 2 weeks, I received HOA violation notices for my trash cans being visible from the street, even though I brought them in within an hour of trash pickup. I got cited for having weeds in my driveway, except there were no weeds. I got a notice that my house number was the wrong font. Another notice claimed my car was leaking oil on the driveway, which it wasn't. Each violation came with a fine. $50 here, $100 there. Within 2 weeks, I had supposedly racked up $800 in HOA fines, all completely bogus. Richard added everything to our lawsuit. The really interesting thing happened when other neighbors started coming forward. Tom told me that Carol, the woman with the rose bush, wanted to talk to me. I went over to her house on a Sunday afternoon. Carol was 73 years old and had lived in Saguaro Heights since the neighborhood was built in 1998. She invited me in for lemonade and told me her story. "Brenda's been terrorizing me for months," Carol said. "First it was the rose bush. Then she said my fence was the wrong color, even though it's the same color it's always been. Last week she sent me a bill for $3,000, claiming I owed back dues and special assessments that I'd never heard of. Did you pay it? I can't afford to pay it. I'm on a fixed income. My late husband and I paid off this house 20 years ago, and I thought I'd live here peacefully until I died. Now Brenda's threatening to put a lien on my property if I don't pay. I felt sick. Have you talked to a lawyer? I can't afford a lawyer either. That's why I'm so glad Tom told me you were fighting back. Maybe if you win, she'll leave the rest of us alone." Over the next few days, I learned that Brenda had been harassing at least 6 other homeowners in our neighborhood. Most of them were older people on fixed incomes who couldn't afford to fight back. She'd been inventing violations, charging excessive fines and threatening liens. It was a shakedown operation disguised as HOA enforcement. I mentioned this to Richard during one of our meetings. "That might be illegal," he said. "HOAs have to follow their own governing documents. They can't just make up rules and fines arbitrarily. If she's doing what you're describing, she could be in serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Civil liability, possibly criminal charges if there's evidence of fraud or extortion. Let me do some digging." While Richard investigated, my court date was set for mid-May. That gave us about 6 weeks to prepare. In the meantime, Brenda continued her campaign of harassment. She sent me a letter claiming my fence needed repairs. I didn't have a fence. She sent another letter saying my landscaping was dead and needed to be replaced. My desert landscaping was specifically chosen because it required no maintenance and couldn't die. The absolute worst was when she sent a letter claiming I was running an illegal business from my home because my car was parked in my driveway during the day. I worked night shifts. Of course my car was home during the day. But according to Brenda, this indicated I was running some kind of unlicensed operation. I ignored all of it and forwarded everything to Richard. Tom became my unofficial neighborhood spy. He started documenting everything Brenda did. He took photos of her coming and going, noted when she had HOA board meetings, which never seemed to be announced to the community, and tracked which neighbors received violation notices. "She's getting worse," Tom told me one evening in April. She sent the Johnsons a fine for having their garage door open during the day, said it was unsightly. They were unloading groceries. "This has to be illegal." You'd think so, but HOAs have a lot of power in Arizona. I looked it up. They can fine you, put liens on your house, even foreclose if you don't pay. It's crazy. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of my work schedule, but because I was angry. I started reading Arizona HOA law, trying to understand how someone like Brenda could get away with this. What I learned was disturbing. HOAs in Arizona did have significant power, but they also had obligations. They had to follow their own governing documents. They had to give proper notice of meetings. They had to allow homeowners to contest fines. They had to keep accurate financial records. And they absolutely could not use their position for personal gain or retaliation. Brenda was violating pretty much every rule in the book. I compiled everything I'd learned and sent it to Richard. He called me the next day, excited. "This is bigger than your driveway," he said. "I think we need to expand the lawsuit. If she's been doing this to other homeowners, they could join as plaintiffs. We could potentially have the entire HOA board removed and have a court-appointed manager take over until a new election can be held." "How do we do that?" "I need to talk to the other homeowners. Can you set up a meeting?" The following Saturday, 11 homeowners gathered in Tom's living room. Richard explained what we could do legally. Several people, including Carol, agreed to join the lawsuit. Others were too scared of retaliation. "What if she finds out we're planning this?" asked a man named Gregory who lived 3 houses down from me. "She's going to find out when we file the amended complaint," Richard said. "But by then, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it. The court will see a pattern of abuse, and that's going to make our case much stronger." We filed the amended lawsuit the following Monday. Now it wasn't just me against Brenda. It was me, Carol, Gregory, and 2 other homeowners, all documenting years of harassment, fraudulent fines, and HOA abuse. Brenda lost her mind. I came home from work on Tuesday to find that she'd called the police on me. 2 Phoenix PD officers were waiting in my driveway. "Are you Oliver Anderson?" one of them asked. "Yes, is something wrong?" "We received a call from your neighbor claiming you've been harassing her, threatening her. She wants to file a restraining order." I almost laughed. "Officers, I haven't spoken to that woman in weeks. I've been avoiding her. In fact, I have a lawsuit against her right now for extending her driveway onto my property." I pointed at the asphalt. "See that? That used to be my lawn." The officers looked at the driveway extension, then at each other. "She also claims you've been trespassing on her property at night," the other officer said. "I work night shifts at Valley Presbyterian Hospital. I'm an ER nurse. I'm at work all night. You can verify that with my employer." They took down my information and left. I later learned from Tom that Brenda had called the police on 3 other neighbors that same week, making various false claims. The police started catching on that she was wasting their time. April turned into May, and our court date approached. Richard deposed Brenda, which I wasn't allowed to attend, but he told me afterward that she'd been combative and evasive. She kept claiming she had documentation for everything, but when I asked her to produce it, she said it was at home or in storage or with the HOA's lawyer. It was obvious she was lying. Did she explain the driveway extension? She stuck with her story about the new survey, but she still couldn't produce it. I asked her who conducted the survey, and she gave me a company name. I called them. They've never heard of her or our neighborhood. So she just made it up, completely fabricated the whole thing. She really thought she could just pave over your lawn and get away with it. The preliminary hearing was set for May 14th. I took the day off work and met Richard at the courthouse. It was a small hearing room, not like the dramatic courtrooms you see on TV. Just a judge, a bailiff, some chairs, and a lot of wood paneling. Brenda showed up with her husband, Dennis, and their attorney, a nervous-looking woman named Patricia who seemed like she regretted taking this case. Judge Maria Hernandez presided. She was in her 60s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She read through the case file, looked at both parties, and asked Richard to present his argument. Richard laid it all out. The unauthorized driveway extension, the fabricated survey, the retaliatory HOA violations, the harassment of other homeowners. He showed photos, property records, and copies of all the bogus violation notices. Then he showed the judge something I didn't know about. Your Honor, we've also obtained the HOA's financial records through discovery. What we found is disturbing. Mrs. Cunningham has been collecting fines from homeowners and depositing them into a personal account, not the HOA's account. Over the past 6 months, she's collected approximately $15,000 in fines and special assessments, none of which went to the HOA. The judge's eyebrows went up. Is this true? Patricia, Brenda's attorney, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Your Honor, my client maintains that she was holding those funds temporarily until the HOA could establish a new banking relationship. For 6 months, Judge Hernandez asked. We can explain the banking situation. I'm sure you can. What about the driveway extension? Do you have documentation showing that land belongs to Mrs. Cunningham? Patricia shuffled through her papers. We're still trying to locate the survey company's records. You've had weeks to produce this evidence. Do you have it or not? Not at this time, Your Honor. Judge Hernandez sat back in her chair. Here's what's going to happen. I'm issuing a preliminary injunction. Mrs. Cunningham, you are ordered to cease all HOA enforcement actions against the plaintiffs immediately. No more fines, no more violation notices, nothing. Second, you are ordered to remove the driveway extension from Mr. Anderson's property within 30 days at your own expense. Third, you are to provide a full accounting of all HOA funds you've collected, with documentation showing where every penny went. We'll have a full hearing in 60 days to address the remaining issues. Do you understand? Brenda stood up, her face red. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to maintain property values in our neighborhood, and these people are attacking me for doing my job. Sit down, Mrs. Cunningham, the judge said. You paved over someone else's property without permission. That's not maintaining property values. That's trespassing and property damage. You're lucky I'm not holding you in contempt right now. Brenda sat down, fuming. We left the courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Richard was grinning. That went better than expected, he said. What happens now? Now she has to remove the driveway. If she doesn't, we go back to the judge and she'll face contempt charges. And once we get into that full hearing, we're going to nail her on the financial stuff. If she really did steal HOA funds, that's a crime. So this isn't over, not even close, but we won the first battle. I went home and told Tom what happened. Within an hour, half the neighborhood knew. People started coming by to congratulate me. Carol brought over a casserole. Gregory brought beer. It felt like a block party. Brenda didn't take the loss well. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted "Liar" across my garage door in red paint. Tom's security camera had caught Brenda's husband, Dennis, doing it at 3 in the morning. I called the police. This time, they took it seriously. Dennis was arrested for criminal damage and released on bond. Brenda tried to claim he was framed, but video evidence doesn't lie. With Dennis facing criminal charges and the judge's order hanging over them, Brenda and her husband finally started to realize they were in trouble. Patricia, their attorney, withdrew from the case, citing ethical conflicts. 2 weeks after the hearing, a construction crew showed up at Brenda's house. They spent 3 days jackhammering and removing the driveway extension. It was loud, expensive, and deeply satisfying to watch. Brenda glared at me from her window the entire time. I waved. Once the asphalt was removed, I hired a landscaping company to restore my lawn. They brought in new desert landscaping, some beautiful barrel cacti and decorative rocks. It looked better than it had before, but the story wasn't over. Richard continued digging into the HOA's finances, and what he found was worse than we thought. Brenda hadn't just been collecting fines and pocketing them. She'd been creating fake vendor invoices, claiming the HOA owed money for landscaping and maintenance that never happened, then writing checks to shell companies that she controlled. Over 2 years, she'd embezzled nearly $40,000. This is wire fraud, embezzlement, possibly racketeering depending on how the DA wants to charge it, Richard told me. I have to report this to the authorities. He contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office. They opened an investigation. A detective came to interview me, Tom Carroll, and several other homeowners. The full hearing in July was almost anticlimactic. Judge Hernandez reviewed all the evidence, including the financial fraud Richard had uncovered. She ruled entirely in our favor. Brenda was ordered to pay restitution for the driveway removal, which cost her $12,000. She was ordered to return all the illegally collected fines to the homeowners. She was ordered to repay the $40,000 she'd embezzled from the HOA. And she was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Furthermore, Judge Hernandez said, I'm ordering the dissolution of the current HOA board and appointing a temporary property management company to oversee the HOA until new elections can be held. Mrs. Cunningham, you should be aware that the Attorney General's office has informed me they're pursuing criminal charges against you. I suggest you get a good criminal defense attorney. Brenda didn't say anything. She just sat there, her face pale, while her new attorney took notes. The criminal case took longer. The AG's office charged Brenda with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. Dennis was charged as an accomplice for the criminal damage to my garage and for helping her create the fake vendor companies. I didn't follow the criminal case too closely. I was just glad to have my property back and to see the neighborhood starting to heal. The temporary property management company that took over the HOA was professional and fair. They reviewed all of Brenda's violation notices and canceled about 90% of them as fraudulent. They refunded fines to homeowners who'd been wrongly charged. They held open, properly noticed board meetings where homeowners could actually participate. In September, we held elections for a new HOA board. Tom was elected president. Carol became secretary. A younger couple who'd moved in recently, Mike and Sandra, rounded out the board. They were sensible people who understood that an HOA should maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules, not terrorize homeowners. Brenda's criminal trial happened in November. I had to testify about the driveway extension and the retaliatory fines. Carol testified about the harassment she'd endured. The HOA's accountant testified about the missing money. The jury found Brenda guilty on all counts. Dennis pled guilty to his charges in exchange for probation. In December, Judge Hernandez sentenced Brenda to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA and all affected homeowners. With the money she owed from the civil judgment and the criminal restitution, Brenda was on the hook for about $70,000. She and Dennis ended up selling their house to pay the debts. They moved away before she had to report to prison, and I never saw them again. Life in Saguaro Heights slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, set up a watch program that didn't involve harassing innocent people, and kept the common areas maintained. The monthly dues went to actual maintenance and improvements, not into anyone's pocket. Tom became a great HOA president. He was fair, transparent, and actually listened to homeowners' concerns. Carol helped organize a community garden where several neighbors grew vegetables together. It became a nice gathering place. My front lawn looked better than ever with the new landscaping. Sometimes I'd sit out front in the evening, enjoying the desert sunset and the peaceful neighborhood, thinking about how close I'd come to just letting Brenda get away with paving over my property. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself. Brenda had counted on people being too tired, too scared, or too intimidated to fight back. She'd targeted older people on fixed incomes, people working long hours, people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. She'd weaponized the HOA's legitimate authority to line her own pockets and bully her neighbors. But when people finally stood together and fought back, her entire scheme fell apart. The law was on our side. The evidence was clear. And justice, though slow, eventually prevailed. Richard Mills became something of a neighborhood hero. Several other HOA abuse victims from different communities contacted him after word spread about our case. He started specializing in HOA law and helping homeowners fight back against corrupt boards. As for me, I kept working at the hospital, saving lives and dealing with emergencies. After dealing with Brenda's harassment for months, a guy with a fork stuck in his hand or someone who'd superglued their fingers together seemed almost relaxing by comparison. One evening in January, almost a year after Brenda had paved over my lawn, I was sitting on my front porch when a moving truck pulled up to her old house. A young family was moving in. 2 kids, maybe 7 and 9 years old, were running around excitedly while their parents directed the movers. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Oliver. I live next door. Welcome to the neighborhood." The husband, a friendly guy in his 30s, shook my hand. "Thanks, I'm James. This is my wife, Kelly, and our kids, Sophie and Max. Great to meet you all. If you need anything, just let me know. We've got a good group of neighbors here." "We heard there was some drama with the previous owners," Kelly said, looking a bit concerned. "There was, but it's been resolved. The neighborhood is in good hands now. Our HOA president, Tom, lives across the street. He's a good guy. You'll like it here." And they did. James and Kelly became active in the community. Their kids played with other neighborhood children, and life went on peacefully. Sometimes I'd think about Brenda sitting in prison, probably still convinced she'd done nothing wrong, still believing she'd been persecuted for maintaining property values. The cognitive dissonance required to steal $40,000 and pave over someone's lawn while claiming to be the victim was almost impressive in its audacity. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. The desert landscape I'd installed on my reclaimed lawn flourished. The barrel cacti grew slowly but steadily, developing beautiful yellow flowers each spring. The decorative rocks baked in the Arizona sun, and occasionally a roadrunner would dash through, hunting for lizards. My property was mine again, fully and legally, with updated surveys and clear boundaries. The neighborhood was peaceful. The HOA functioned properly, and I could come home from my shifts at the hospital without wondering what fresh hell awaited me. One Saturday afternoon in February, Tom organized a neighborhood meeting to discuss some minor HOA business. Nothing dramatic, Just routine stuff about repainting the community entrance sign and organizing a spring cleanup day. About 20 homeowners showed up, sitting in Tom's backyard, drinking lemonade and eating cookies that Carol had baked. As I sat there listening to Tom discuss paint colors and cleanup schedules, I realized how different everything felt. A year ago, HOA meetings had been secretive affairs where Brenda made unilateral decisions and issued edicts. Now they were collaborative, transparent, and honestly kind of boring in the best possible way. "Before we wrap up," Tom said, "I want to recognize Oliver for having the courage to stand up to the previous board. If he hadn't fought back, a lot of us would still be dealing with harassment and fraud." "So thanks, Oliver." Everyone clapped, and I felt my face getting warm. "I just didn't want asphalt on my lawn," I said, trying to deflect the attention. "You did more than that," Carol said. "You showed us we didn't have to accept being pushed around. You inspired a lot of us to stand up for ourselves." After the meeting ended and people started heading home, Gregory came up to me. "Hey, I never properly thanked you. Brenda was trying to foreclose on my house over those fake fines. I was about to lose everything. You saved me." "Richard did most of the legal work. But you started it. You could have just let her have that piece of lawn. It wasn't that big. But you stood up for what was right, and that made all the difference." I drove home that evening thinking about what Gregory had said. He was right that I could have let it go. 15 feet of lawn wasn't worth thousands of dollars in legal fees and months of stress. But it wasn't really about the lawn. It was about principle. It was about not letting bullies win. It was about protecting not just my property, but everyone else's too. The legal bills had been substantial. Even though Richard had given me a discount and we'd split costs among the multiple plaintiffs, I'd still spent about $8,000 on the case. But Judge Hernandez's final order had included attorney's fees, so Brenda had to reimburse me for most of it. I ended up only about $1,000 out of pocket, which seemed like a bargain for justice. The neighborhood continued to thrive under Tom's leadership. Property values actually went up once word spread that we'd removed our corrupt HOA board. People wanted to live in a community that stood up for homeowners' rights. In March, exactly 1 year after Brenda had paved over my lawn, Tom organized an anniversary party. It was partly a joke, but mostly an excuse for everyone to get together and celebrate how far we'd come. Someone made a cake decorated with a picture of a driveway with a red X through it. We all laughed about it. "To property rights." Tom toasted, raising his beer. "To property rights." Everyone echoed. I looked around at my neighbors, these people who'd become friends through shared adversity, and felt grateful. Grateful that I'd stood up for myself. Grateful for Richard's legal expertise. Grateful for Judge Hernandez's fairness. And grateful for neighbors who'd supported each other through a difficult time. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The desert air was crisp and clean, and my front lawn was exactly as it should be, with no unauthorized asphalt extensions in sight. Life was good in Saguaro Heights. As spring turned to summer, I occasionally wondered how Brenda was doing in prison. Whether she'd learned anything from the experience or still blamed everyone else for her problems. Whether Dennis visited her or had moved on with his life. Whether she regretted paving over my lawn or just regretted getting caught. But those thoughts never lasted long. I had better things to focus on. My career at the hospital was going well. I'd been promoted to senior nurse and was training new ER staff. The neighborhood was peaceful and prosperous. My lawn looked great. Sometimes the simplest victories are the sweetest ones. A middle-aged woman with a sense of entitlement had tried to take what wasn't hers, had tried to bully and intimidate people into submission, had used her position of authority for personal gain. and she'd lost. Completely and utterly. The law had worked the way it was supposed to work. The system, despite its flaws and delays, had ultimately delivered justice. The good guys had won. On quiet mornings when I'd come home from my night shift, I'd sit on my porch with coffee and watch the sun rise over my property, my legitimate and legally protected property, and feel satisfied. Not smug or vengeful, just satisfied that things had worked out the way they should. Tom proved to be such a good HOA president that he was re-elected unanimously the following year. Carol continued organizing community events. The neighborhood kids played in the streets without fear of their parents getting violation notices. Homeowners maintained their properties because they wanted to, not because they feared harassment. The temporary property management company that Judge Hernandez had appointed eventually handed control back to Tom's board once they were confident things were stable. The HOA's finances were transparent and properly managed. Every penny was accounted for in the end. Brenda's attempt to steal 15 feet of my lawn had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her money, her freedom, and her home. The punishment fit the crime, multiplied by all the other crimes she'd committed along the way. As for me, I got my lawn back, learned a lot about property law and HOA regulations, made some good friends, and came away with a story I'd probably be telling for years. Every time I pull into my driveway, properly situated on my own property with no unauthorized extensions, I'm reminded that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult and expensive and time-consuming, is always worth it. The neighborhood of Saguaro Heights became a cautionary tale in Phoenix HOA circles. Other communities heard about what happened and started scrutinizing their own boards more carefully. Several corrupt HOA presidents in other neighborhoods were exposed and removed following investigations inspired by our case. Richard Mills got so many new clients that he had to hire 2 associate attorneys to help with the caseload. Judge Hernandez's ruling became something of a landmark case in Arizona HOA law. Legal scholars wrote about it. Property rights advocates cited it. Homeowners across the state referenced it when fighting their own HOA battles. But for me, it was personal. It was about my home, my property, my rights. It was about refusing to be bullied. It was about justice. And in the end, justice prevailed. My front lawn, restored to its proper state with beautiful desert landscaping, stood as a testament to the importance of standing your ground. The cacti grew tall and strong. The decorative rocks absorbed the desert heat, and not a single square inch of unauthorized asphalt remained. It was exactly as it should be, and I'd fought to make it that way. That's the story of how my HOA president extended her driveway onto my lawn, and how a judge made her remove it at her own expense. But it's also a story about community, courage, and the fundamental right to protect what's yours. It's a story about how one person's decision to fight back can inspire others and create lasting change. And every time I look at my front lawn, I'm reminded that some fights are worth fighting, some principles are worth defending, and some victories, though hard won, are absolutely worth the effort.